an interesting point. I mean, there are a lot of people that are the early, it's just like Crossing the Chasm or that book, right? You know, the early people who join these things, they really don't like the existing system. They're a little quirky. They have higher risk tolerance. And you do need to get into bigger concentric circles to cross the chasm, right? And the internet was the same way. I mean, the early internet was weird, right? And people would compare that to New York Times or watching cable TV, and they'd be like, oh my gosh, this is so illegitimate, like these silly blog posts and stuff. And it slowly became, you know, bigger than the traditional thing. You guys are an example of that. So I think crypto will get there, but yes, there has to be a willingness to bring in the next round of people and the next one, and maybe they're into art, or maybe they're into just earning a living and paying their family overseas. They're not even into crypto itself. People used to only write desktop software, like Microsoft Office, and then Google came along and they're like, hey, what if we could do everything in a browser? And you know, Google Docs and Sheets was initially like way worse than a desktop software. It was always going to be slower because it was you're building on a web stack and all this. And you know, the tools got better and JavaScript engines got better, and I think that's the you know, broadband happened. I think that's the era that crypto is going through, and it's our responsibility as the companies in the space to make this happen. No one's going to do it for us. You know, there's all these competing protocols. There's big egos. There's personalities. We've got to come together, make the tools simpler, integrate them, make them interoperable. I think there should be less regulation around this. I think it would create more innovation. Society would have to tolerate greater variance, right? There'd be more scams, there'd be more highs, there'd be more lows. But the truth of the matter is a lot of times you have regulation and it ends up having the opposite of the intended effect. So we don't live in that world where people are going to say, well, let's just be hands-off and do nothing. So when I go to DC, the Overton window of discussion is basically, we're going to do the regulation for you, or you can engage and have a say. And so, of course, we're going to take the other side and say, okay, let's try to help craft that regulation. But if you ask me just personally as like a citizen, there should be less regulation, I think. So we can start with what I think regulation could be or should be, and then let's talk about what the regulators are actually doing, because it's a little bit different. So, you know, the actual regulation that would allow this industry to be built here in a safe way, but also protect the innovation, it would do things that are actually kind of similar to the traditional financial services industry. So you would have some basic rules in place around, okay, you need to get these audits complete, you know, wash trading is illegal, let's make an actual process for somebody who wants to register a crypto security, and it could trade on a broker-dealer or these kinds of things. And so these are actually not rocket science, they're just kind of copying a lot of the best practices like AML, KYC, those kind of things from the traditional financial services industry, and centralized players in crypto should have to follow those. Now, if you're doing a decentralized thing, I don't think that's a financial service business. You're never taking possession of customer funds, like these decentralized protocols or self-custodial wallets. I think that should be treated more like the software industry, and the centralized players should be more regulated. Now, you can also do things like have a sandbox for innovation and say, okay, if you're a startup and you can't afford $20 million a year in legal bills, you know, you're under a certain amount, then you can operate in this sandbox, and there's other things other countries have done. What's actually happened is not quite that, although there are some good bills going through Congress. Unfortunately, we have a regulator, the chair of the SEC, who's kind of weaponized the agency for his own political purposes.
Gary Gensler.
Right, along with Elizabeth Warren, they just don't want crypto to exist in the United States.
Wait, isn't their argument, well, just register like we all do when we sell securities? And what's your best argument for why crypto shouldn't just do what we all do every day, which is register securities?
I'm all for that, yeah. I mean, there should be a robust, healthy market to trade crypto securities in the US. There is not currently a way to register. And so they've been sort of talking out of both sides of their mouth and then saying, hey, just come in and register. And then you see these exchanges come in that have never traded a single coin as like, you know, the ones that are propped up as like the ones that are following the rules. So they're actually, I think what their true intention or belief is behind the scenes, and I'm speculating a little bit here, is they just don't want it to exist. And so they're trying to cast a shadow over the whole industry to make it difficult. They're just sending subpoenas and Wells notices. Why don't they want it to
exist? Why?
I believe it's because, and again, this is just me speculating a little bit, I think it's because they don't want to lose power. They think the government should run financial services. They have their hooks into the big banks. They can pressure the big banks to close accounts on, you know, if you have the wrong political opinion or you're in the wrong industry, you're in oil and gas or whatever the flavor of the day is. They want to be able to pressure companies because they can't get it done through Congress. They want to pressure it through the big banks. And crypto, in America, people should be free to have control of their own money, to use new technologies. It's fundamentally anti-American what they're doing, and I think next year in the elections, we need to make sure that all voters and people who are pro-innovation, pro-technology, vote people out of office who are trying to curtail our freedoms around crypto. They're absolutely correct that this industry has attracted some really bad people, right? I will admit that. If you look at the beginnings of any new technology, you know, the internet, there was lots of scams. Even in traditional financial services, we have Bernie Madoff and Exxon periodically, right? So what you should do in a free society is if somebody commits fraud, absolutely, that's what the justice system should do, is go after them, create a deterrent, put them in jail. You know, Sam Bankman-Fried should go to jail. It does not mean that the industry should be outlawed. And one of the really dangerous things that's happening is that, you know, the Constitution says that Congress creates the laws. What's happened sort of is that we've created these agencies, and because they can just send subpoenas to everybody or publish these guidance letters, you know, this is kind of the administrative state, if you will, they are de facto creating laws. You know, other industries, like in the FDA, if the FDA puts out a guidance letter and you don't like it, what are you going to do? It's a de facto law. And so there's an interesting constitutional argument around this of like, is the administrative state overreaching? And I think, yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. Anytime you create a startup and you go up against some big incumbent, there's going to be a shift of power. And, you know, in the US, the government enjoys this monopoly on issuing the currency, right? They have, in the US, our banks are more privatized than, say, China or most other countries, but they're quasi-nationalized in the US. I mean, we talked about the revolving door and all the kind of oversight, and like a bank cannot launch a new product without government approval, so, you know, how really private market is it? I think Bill Gurley showed that graph of like, there haven't been any new banks really created since Dodd-Frank. So it's a quasi-nationalized industry. Of course, some people are going to be upset about losing the power of that, but in America, this is a free country, and American citizens should be free to use any technology that they want. They should be free to use cryptocurrency, and as long as you're not hurting somebody else, that should be protected as a freedom here. Yeah, well, so that is one of the great things about America that makes me bullish on it, is that we do have these different branches of government that are such a great check and balance. And you're right, and the judicial branch has been kind of my favorite branch of government in the last few months. And they've really the SEC has gone 0 for 3 in the courts. The courts kind of keep upholding rule of law, which has been really great. So there's been a handful of cases. There was the Ripple one, there was the Terraform one, which agreed on this idea that the underlying crypto assets themselves were not securities. That's a very important fact, by the way, in our case with the SEC. And then just recently there was this Grayscale Trust, ETF, and you know, the judge ruled that the SEC was arbitrary and capricious and unlawful in not approving their application.
This is what you mean when you say they're just de facto passing laws where they don't necessarily have the rights to do it. They're blocking free enterprise. They're blocking the ability for you guys to just do business.
Yeah, and unless you're a big company like Coinbase, you don't have the legal budget to kind of go to court and fight these things out. And you know, I can tell you as a public company, I talked to a number of other people, and they were like, you know, oh my gosh, you can't sue the SEC, like, or engage in litigation with them, that you're a public company, you have to settle, and like, I was sort of, the settlement option on the table was to essentially delist everything other than Bitcoin, and so that would have been the end of the industry in the US. It was an easy choice. Of course, if we think the law doesn't say that, we're gonna go to court. Yeah, so I'll run through a couple of them that are there already today, and then there's a couple on the horizon. So, obviously trading was this first use case. Then we saw things like, you know, stablecoins have actually gotten quite a bit of adoption. There's about 150 billion or so locked up in stablecoins, useful for payments, you know, cross-border stuff, all kinds of things. You know, DeFi obviously got to, I think it's probably at about 50 billion total value locked up in that, which is meaningful. I wouldn't say it's been mainstream by any stretch, but it's certainly material. Even NFTs got to a pretty, I think it came down like 90% plus, but it's still, it's in the tens of billions, okay? So those are things I'd say are, you know, they worked, and I think they'll grow over time. I'll talk about what I think could unlock that next wave of growth too, but there's a couple others that are on the horizon. So decentralized identity, you know, ENS is probably the most popular one. There's only been about 3 million or so people who've used ENS so far, but you see it show up a lot of people.
Explain what that is.
Well, ENS is the Ethereum name system, so it's a decentralized identity, so you can control your own information online. It's not like using Google or Apple or a big company.
My Twitter X profile, my Facebook profile, this is who I am, I can prove it.
Yeah, and this is kind of the vision of Web3 is that if everybody has their decentralized identity, then you can now create a follower graph. You could make posts associated with that, like text, video, audio, to make a decentralized social network. You know, artists could have a direct relationship with their fans and have provenance. And if you're, you know, CNN and you want to publish an article, it can be cryptographically proven that it came from that account. It's not like a fake GPT. Yeah, so I do think there's a few things that can help unlock this next wave of adoption. UX is one of them. I mean, so it starts with what we started with at the beginning. Pretty much every crypto startup is just getting a subpoena right now, and that's not fun, especially if you're two kids with a laptop and a dream, and like, you know, your parents are worried you're going to go to jail or something. So the regulatory apparatus has been quite bad, and I think that'll hopefully shift here in the next few years as we get, you know, Congress to act, or a new SEC chair, or CFTC, or someone. But put that aside. The other big blocker has been the scalability of the blockchains. So to do every transaction on chain is still, if you do it on layer 1, it's like anywhere from $5 to $25. It takes anywhere from a few minutes to an hour to confirm. So that's not going to work in this to really build decentralized applications where every upvote or like or post could, you know, has to happen on chain. So we're getting now to layer 2 solutions, which is sort of like the internet going from dial-up to broadband. And Coinbase is trying to help that. You know, we launched our own layer 2 solution called Base recently, and it gets the cost and the speed down by about an order of magnitude. The metric I've been tracking internally, and I kind of push our team on, is we need every transaction to get under 1 cent in 1 second. If that feels like a threshold where we'd see an explosion of new use cases. The last one is the UX, as you put it. And today, it's kind of remarkable, actually, how many people use these things, like DeFi and NFTs, because the process to actually use it is crazy. It's like you buy the crypto on Coinbase, sometimes you'll move it to a Chrome extension, you have to connect your wallet into this thing, and like, you have to know what private keys are. And so if we can just make that where, you know, it's sort of like a WeChat app or something where, you know, you're instantly connected in your wallet and your identity when you load it up in your browser or equivalent self-custodial wallet, and it's just one click and it's done. You know, that's what we need to get to as an industry. Scalability, UX, regulatory improvement. That's it.